Hey everyone, welcome back to another video here on DarkSec. I am Dark, and today we're going to talk about Nmap. This is actually going to be the first video in the InfoSec primer series. This series has the goal of, if you're watching this, you can immediately go and get an internship following completing all the activities and completing all the videos once this series is complete. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it and learn about one of our core tools, Nmap. Alright, so first and foremost, the heck is an Nmap? This is a network mapping tool. It's sort of like a radar, except we can change how it scans. We can essentially use this to get a network or a map of our attack surface. So whatever we're examining, we can go through and sort of feel it out and see what we're actually working with. We're going to use this traditionally as our first step in our penetration tests when we're actually on the network to feel out what we're working with and feel out what kind of services are running on our target machines. So this is widely considered one of the most important tools to know. I would consider this probably the most important. This is something that if you don't know how to use Nmap, you're going to struggle with everything else, and lucky for you, Nmap is very easy. So some of the scan types, and this is something that I could go over a little bit more thoroughly in the Red Primer Room RP Nmap that is actually the companion to this video. So check that out in case you have any further questions or want an exercise to go with this. So some of the scan types, we have the SYN scan. This is different from the TCP scan. The SYN scan is a half open scan. This is essentially we're walking up to the port, we're starting a handshake, and we're dragging our hand away at the last second saying, too slow. And we're seeing what it responds with because we can get a lot of information about the service. So a lot of times we're just going to get banners off of this, such as HTTP patchy saying that it's running a web server or something like that. Additionally, we can do a service version scan, which is a -S_V, which is a basic enumeration of services. So Nmap has a variety of scripts built in, and different versions of services respond in different ways. With this, we can get a fairly precise reading on services that we're seeing on a port, and it'll give us a good idea, at least at a glance, of if there's anything that's immediately vulnerable based on its service version. And it might be something that we're looking for, maybe an RCE, and we'll see that a little bit further down in the InfoSec primer series when we're looking at things like Eternal Blue, and we're seeing that, we can scan that and we can know immediately that it's vulnerable. The last really important scan type to know about is the UDP scan. This is something you won't necessarily use a lot, but it is something that is great to know about. The UDP ports, they're not used as much, and this scan doesn't see a lot of use just because if you're scanning UDP, it's usually your last resort. And most important things, there are some important things that live on UDP, but most things are TCP. Some examples of things that are UDP, part of DNS is UDP, so that's something to be aware of. Chat servers a lot of times can be UDP, so voice chat, where it's not important for every single packet to get through, things like that. However, we do this to be thorough, and we can go through, and I recommend looking at your top 100 ports to see if there's something obvious that's sitting out there, just to see if there's something that we really want to take a look at. Some of the switches to know. The first one is going to be your help menu, which is -H or --help. That's going to get your help menu dialog. If you ever have any questions about Nmap, or maybe you need to double check some of the options, that's going to be your best friend, and that's something that we're going to see pretty heavily with most of the tools that we'll examine as we go throughout this course. Operating system detection, which is going to be -O, and again, that's a capital O, not a 0. Different operating systems will respond to packets in different ways with different time to live, so TTLs, and other various characteristics. Using those differences, Nmap is actually able to interrogate the machine and figure out roughly what operating system it is. It may not be 100% accurate, but it can give you a lot of insight into what we're looking at. This next one here is my personal favorite. Furthermore, it's the -V, very verbose. That is my personal favorite switch. Verbose, or -V, allows us to set the verbosity of our scan. It gives us output as it's running, so we're not just sitting and waiting. This can be really useful to make sure that our scans aren't just hanging, We use this typically to take a look and make sure that perhaps the scan, we see that it's suddenly dropping a bunch of packets and the response time has gone from 10 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds, and that's really, really bad when we start seeing those dramatic increases. So we can get some insight into what the scan's actually doing and make sure that it's actually making progress by using the verbose scan. And then the last important one on this page is the ports to scan. So with this, you don't technically actually need this space. So we see -P and then 21. You don't need this space here. You can do -P21. So for example, if you just wanted to scan FTP, you can do that. However, what we can do is we can do -P and then a range here, a single port, or a single port separated by commas. Or we can do -P-, which this actually scans every single port. This is something that I recommend doing in your full scan. So I typically do Nmap scanning in a series of 2 stages. One is an initial scan, which isn't going to necessarily give me a lot of information, but it's going to give me enough that I can start digging into the machine while I run a fuller scan. The initial scan we'll go over here in just a little bit when we actually do a scan on a machine. That is going to give you just basic ports and something that you can just start doing basic enumeration on. And then the extended scan is where I would go back and use this -P- to take a look at every single port on the system to see if something's hiding and being sneaky. So some more switches to know. We have the aggressive scan, which is the -A. This does operating system enumeration. It does a service version scan, and I believe it also runs default scripts, which is -S_C, which is a fantastic switch to run as well. This is, if you're going to run a bunch against it, the aggressive scan is probably worthwhile. This is definitely going to show up on a SIM installation, so if you're monitoring that host and you're trying to be sneaky, or you know someone's monitoring that host and you want to be sneaky, you don't necessarily want to run this against that host because this will show up pretty obviously. However, for our purposes, we don't really care about being sneaky. We care about actually getting an accurate read on the host, and then we're going to move from there. We can move on to being sneaky later on in the course and what specifically that entails. The next one that we have is timing. So there are technically 6 levels of timing. There's one that I believe there's T0 below this. However, we range typically from T1 to T5, T1 being on the slow end, and then T5 being on the, I don't really care if the host responds, I just want to keep scanning, so it's the insane scan. You can get away with that when you have a very good connection to the host, and you aren't worried about packets dropping and potentially having an inaccurate scan. T3 is going to be the default. This is what the scan runs at just by default. If you want to run a scan that's a little bit faster, I typically recommend using the -T4. That's going to give you a lot more speed and agility with your scan without necessarily compromising all of your accuracy, but it'll still give you quite a bit there to work with. And then a couple more switches to know. The don't ping scan. So in the case that your host has a firewall, so a good example of a host that doesn't have a firewall is Retro or Blaster on THM. That has a Windows firewall up that doesn't let ICMP or ping traffic through. With this, we can tell Nmap to skip that host discovery stage, because Nmap, in an effort to speed up your scan, is going to try to ping everything and do a couple different checks to see if that host is alive. If the firewall's on, Nmap's going to say, hey, this host is dead, I'm not actually going to scan it. So we can go through and set the don't ping or skip host discovery stage, and we can tell it just start scanning. Very useful, especially if you know that the host is already alive. So for example, if you have a dedicated host that you've deployed, you can usually just put this in there by default and it'll speed up your scan quite a bit. And then last but not least, we have our output. So there are 4 different flavors of this. We have the -O_X, which is your XML output, O_G, which is greppable, which, as the name would imply, it's nice for searching through afterwards. It allows a lot of unique spots, so you can go through and grab specific things out of the scan, and it makes it very, very convenient. And then we have -O_N, which isn't actually shown here. That is the raw Nmap output, so what you would otherwise see put out to the terminal in standard output. That saves it to a file that's just a .nmap file or a .txt file for all intents and purposes. And Then we have -O capital A, which is all formats. So we can go through and get everything in XML, greppable, and then an Nmap format, which can be very useful, especially if you're working with a reporting tool. So for example, Nmap in its XML output is actually pretty commonly used with reporting tools such as, I believe, Dratis can take it in. And there's a whole number of other ones that you can take that and it will help you because it'll say, hey, let me just take out the ports that are already open and it'll add it to your report. And as eventually we get into reporting, and for example, looking at like the report that you would need for an OSCP exam, that's something that you're going to want to have, and it's going to make life a lot easier because you essentially just don't have to fill it out, and the reporting software will do it for you. Another important part of Nmap, we have the scripting engine. So this is where that -SC comes in. So Nmap, this is probably the biggest feature that a lot of people don't necessarily know about. Nmap supports custom scripts to be run, so they can run different checks. One of my favorite sets of scripts to be run is actually this bottom one here, the script vuln. This is going to run everything within the vulnerability check category. So for example, if you want to check for eternal blue or something else that's low hanging, this will go through and it actually does a pretty good job of doing a light vulnerability scan. So just something to know about, especially if you want that low hanging fruit. This is great for the when you want to go back and do a full scan of the host and make sure that you have everything accounted for. Otherwise, you can run specific categories just by using like the vuln name. There are different auxiliary scans. You can go through and explore these at your own pace. What I typically recommend using is this -S capital C. This is the default scripts. It runs only safe scripts, so things that we know won't actually crash a service. Typically, they can crash services still. We just have to be a little bit aware of that. And it's just going to run a standard set of scripts. It gives you a pretty good amount of output. So for example, if you encounter an FTP server, a lot of times this will attempt to see if it can log in. And it doesn't always do it. Sometimes it can miss that, but it'll see if anonymous access is enabled. Things like that. Simple checks, just things that are good to go over. And then we'll skip past these. These are a couple things for the Nmap room itself. So we're going to go ahead and take a brief break, and we're going to come back and do a couple quick scans against the host just to see what we're working with. All right, and we're back. So to sum this up, we're going to do a couple quick scans against blue. This is a great example because we're going to be able to see how the vuln category can work, and we're going to get quite a bit of information from that. So without further ado, I've jumped into the blue room here. This is just on Try Hack Me, and this is a free room. It's nice and easy, very nice for just doing examples like this. In this case, we won't actually be doing the rest of the room. We're going to go through and just do our scan. So we'll wait for this to come up, but while we're waiting, we're going to go ahead and make just a couple folders. So first, we're going to do make dir scans, and then exploits, and then loot. Those are just a couple of base structure folders. That's actually something that InfoSec does, so full credit to him for that structure. It works really, really well for boxes, and I actually will use that, and I put my Nmap output in scans along with other things. So while we're waiting, it looks like our box has come up, so we'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll do Nmap -SV -SC-OA scans, and then we'll name this initial, and we're going to paste in our IP there. So with this, we're doing a version scan, we're doing a common script scan, and then we're going to do output all versions to the scans directory with the file initial name. The file is going to be named initial, and then it'll have .xml, .nmap, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and run that, and we will be back in just a moment. And we're back again. So we've gone ahead, our scan is completed. This took probably about 1.5 minutes to run just because this box can be a little bit sluggish to respond. But let's take a look at what we've received here just for running with these flags. So initially here we can see that our output is broken down into port, state, service, and version, at least at the initial at the top. Here we can see the various ports that are open. Once you start getting a little bit more experience with hacking, you'll start to memorize these. For example, these top ports, these top four at least, these are really good ones to know, especially 3389, with this one being remote desktop services, so RDP, and then MSRPC ports appear along with Samba and things like that. From this, we can also see the various services that they are over here, along with their actual version. So the 445 is going to be our most interesting one here, since it reveals that we have scanned a Windows 7 Professional 7601 Service Pack 1 box. If you haven't had much experience with this, that service pack along with this version is a massive red flag. This is very, very old, and as we can see at this point, Windows 7 has been retired as of this year. So this is something that, if this is living on your network, this is problematic, and this is immediately vulnerable in this state, and that's something that we'll see with the expanded scan. Going down a little bit further, we can see some more output. This is actually where the script output begins. So here we can see just common scripts that were run against the box, and here we can see the host name, along with a couple other interesting details. For example, the work group name, the system time, and then just a couple other interesting details down here below. That being said, let's go ahead and jump over to the expanded scan, and we're going to see what we've got. And it looks like this one's still running, but here we can see up at the top that I've run this with some different flags. So we have Nmap -A. Again, that's going to be that aggressive scan, which is going to do service version enumeration. It's going to do that operating system enumeration, and then it's also going to do common scripts. I have -P-, so we scan every single port on the system. And then I'm also running the script category of vulns to see if there's anything that's immediately vulnerable, with very verbose output. And then I have it outputting to the scans directory with the expanded file name. So we're going to go ahead. We'll be back in just a moment once this scan completes. And we're back. So this scan took a little bit longer to complete, probably about 2 minutes longer, but as you can see, we have a lot more information from it. Let's go ahead and scroll up, and we can start taking a look at what we've received. So this is going to be the start of the actual output. All of this up here, this is from setting the very verbose flag here. It's just showing us what's happening as the scan progresses. So here we can see the various open ports that it found, along with the actual progress of the scan. And you can get this by pressing space or pressing enter, just any key, while you are letting the scan run. I typically recommend just enter. Works fine. Let's scroll down and take a look at the differences in the output. And here you can see that it's running different things like OS detection and other things like that. So here at the top, we can see that this looks pretty similar in structure to what we saw with the initial scan. Here we can see the ports over here on the left, their state, and then service, and then various other things here, along with some more information per port. So with this, we actually have the vulnerability scan information tacked on to each port category, so it's nice and organized. Our prime example here is actually going to be this 3389, along with, let's see, I think we have it a little bit down below. Yep. So we can see that we had some vulnerability checks run for MS1220, and then we had, another one for MS1220, just checking to see if this is vulnerable, and it looks like it is in this specific case. I don't know if that's an accurate reading. This is not 100% accurate all the time. However, it is a pretty good resource, but we can see that we initially have something immediately that we can act on and try running exploits of for this CVE here. It looks like that one's slightly different, but yeah, we can go through and essentially try that again and see if we can actually get remote code execution with that. And we have some various ephemeral MSRPC ports up here. We don't necessarily care about those. That's not really anything too interesting. Then we have the host information that we got from the previous set of scans. However, we can see that we've also done some additional vulnerability checks. Now, as you go through and do blue, you will eventually come across this vulnerability, MS1710. This is Eternal Blue. This is actually what this box is intentionally vulnerable to, and here we can see that Nmap has it actually just checked for that, where it's gone through and said, hey, let's see, and yep, we found out that we are vulnerable to that. So we can use this information by running some additional scans against the actual host. By running those additional scans, we get more information that we can act upon. However, this did take significantly longer, but even then, this is something that you probably want to run in a tiered manner, and that's something that I'll move into as you get a little bit more practice with this. Otherwise, that's going to do it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to hop in the Discord. I'll have the link below to the DarkSec Discord. Otherwise, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you guys next time.